Good afternoon. I think it is that time. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm super excited to spend the next 20 minutes with you talking about why we need to move beyond faster horses in measuring and managing culture. And I guess for me, or I guess for you, who in the last 24 hours has been onto either their Fitbit, or they've been onto their Samsung, or they've been into their iPhone, and they've clicked on the health. They've started to look at, I see some people smiling. They're looking at the steps, looking at how much sleep they've had, looking at their calories. And I bet you're doing it because you've got an objective in mind, right? I mean, looking at this audience, I imagine some of you are clearly preparing for an ultra marathon, which I can see. And I can see another cohort who look like they're preparing to be beach body ready. And the sun's out, and we've just got a few weeks to go. Now, isn't it amazing that we can look on our phone and technology allows us to be able to look at all these indicators around data that we use to make smarter decisions so we can perform better in these ultra marathons and deliver greater productivity. You know, what a world to be alive in when technology allows us to do that. And what I find interesting about that is when you now look at organizations, and we're trying to help organizations to be beach body ready, or indeed to do the equivalent of the ultra marathons, the technology, shall we say, is quite interesting, right? We call it the British interesting, right? Because I feel that actually the culture puzzle, which is what lays beneath, the culture puzzle is real in terms of how do we make culture tangible so that we're able to make smarter decisions around how we deliver all of the challenges that we need to as an HR team. And I guess Perry Timms talked about a lot of the challenges. There's a lot of conversations around the challenges, but the culture is the deal maker in it. And when I look at what we have currently, I think there's a lot of value in engagement surveys, right? I do feel that if you're a leadership and you've put lots of interventions into an organization, then it's quite right that you want to give voice to the employees to be able to give you a view on those things. Are we making good products? Are we competitive? Do we have great career opportunities? All these things are useful to leadership. I have to be honest, I do wonder if you get a 3.6 around are we living the vision. I don't know what it takes to get it to a 4.2, but just leave it at that for now. But there's a role for these things. I think equally, there's a role for psychometric profiling and testing. And you'll all be very, very familiar with these because you'll use them as part of the attraction, selection, and onboarding process. So there's a clear role for these tools. But when it comes to the role of technology, I kind of feel like the principles are the same, but what technology has allowed us to do is to create faster horses. Now, I don't know if the technologist asked the question and that were the answers, but clearly, if you look at the proliferation of all of the tech in this space, a lot of traditional ways of measuring these things, technology has allowed us to have greater immediacy to them, greater autonomy around them, and they give us the ability to slice and dice. And that, for me, is great, but these don't actually tell you what your culture's like. My feeling is that in many ways, what they do, as valuable they are, they almost give you an optical illusion around what your culture is. And we felt quite strongly about that. And let's be honest, culture's under pressure. And we've heard lots of people talk today about lots of the reasons why culture is under pressure in organizations. And if it's not just what we're seeing in the OECD, talking about the level of growth, we're going to be the slowest, I don't want to be the bearer of bad news, but it was in the press. And they were talking about in 2025, out of the G7, we might be one of the slowest growing economies. So even if you take that macro picture and you look internally and we're grappling with AI, we're grappling with linking millennials to purpose, and we're grappling with integrating mergers and acquisitions, and we're grappling with trying to provide psychological safety, on all those challenges, that puts pressure on culture. And when you add pressure to culture, it becomes a force multiplier. Things start to widen. And that, for me, is the equivalent of seeing that on your thing in the morning and say, well, how am I going to be beach body ready if my constitution is under so much pressure? Now, we felt that, for that reason, we have to think differently. And it became very apparent to us, and we feel very strongly that to understand culture, which I'm going to come onto and explain, you have to understand its link to values. And I'm going to come back to that. I'm not talking about stuff on walls, but values. Probably in the name, brands of values. And even if you don't think there's a link to values and culture, I think you have to link to the data that we're seeing. And the data that we are seeing is that... Hello. The data that we're seeing is that Gen Z, or Gen Z, or millennials, they want to work in organisations that live their values, right? That's very apparent. So what are values? What are values? What's the mic like when it works? Values are indeed what we value, right? They inform our outlook, right? They inform our decisions and they inform our behaviours. But crucially, the initial set of values, they're personal to us. And I guess I often thought about my own. What became apparent was when I was working in all of these organisations over the last 20 odd years, what would happen would be the following. So I had my own personal values, and which, just to keep it simple, I'm driven by creativity, innovation, and autonomy. And then I would join these organisations, and before thinking about, I would look at their communicated values. And I'm kind of making sense of it, and I'm saying, okay, their values seem to be aligned to the things that I care about, what I get out of bed for. Then I started to say, okay, when I join these organisations, I would then start to think about the reality. The reality was, I've seen the connection, I've joined, I've had my induction, and as you go around the business and you start to meet people, you start to get a real sense of the observed values that are going on in the organisation. And that's when it occurred to us in Brands of Values that the epitome of organisational harmony is when there's an overlap at that intersection between personal values, or i.e. the communicated ones. They've said our organisation's about X. They chime with mine because I'm driven by these things. And I observe them in the first 100 days and beyond, and of course I desire them. And I realised that that's when I did my best work. That's when my team did its best work. That's when leadership did their best work. And I also found the other thing to be true. My own performance and productivity would go down when there's misalignment. And I saw that in many organisations that I worked in. And I started to realise that when you see dysfunction, the KPIs around customer metrics, employee metrics, capability metrics, what else is? Efficiency metrics, operational metrics, they all start to go down when you see dysfunction. So myself and my co-founder and the ex-CEO of Barclays, we created Brands of Values. And we were very clear that we wanted to help organisations manage the gap between dysfunction and harmony with values. Now, firstly, we started to think about, okay, that all sounds very great. How are you going to do that? And we started to think about what organisations are. And actually, I went to an event, and Mr. Timms, who spoke earlier, said something which breathed a whole load of life into what we were doing, because it was something we agreed on. And it is this: organisations are just constructs that humans walk into. And it's the way humans interact in a construct that creates culture. Fact. So we're in a construct now, and there are humans in here, and the way we treat each other for here and the rest of the day, we will go away with a sense of the culture of this event. So he said, if it's that simple, we then need to think about what is it that drives us as humans? What drives the way we communicate and behave and de facto creating the culture? And we became clear that that is our values. It's our values that drive the way we communicate and behave, and as a result creates culture. Although interestingly, we measure organisation by behaviours without understanding people's deep motivations. Anyway, you can come to my TED talk on that. But the key thing here is measuring the ecosystem has to be about values. I think I've made that point. So, that became the underpinning of the culture decoder, which is a whole system of how we help people measure and manage culture. And it's predicated on people just spending 6 minutes hitting 10 words across 3 word walls of up to 100 words. And they find it hugely cathartic because we're asking them, what are your personal values? So you're asking your colleagues, what gets you out of bed in the morning? What do you currently see in the culture? What would you like it to see in the culture? And then, unbeknown to them, while they're hitting creative, innovative, structured, safe, traditional, quality, agile, success, it's going through this model that's built on the work of Shalom Schwartz, which has been tested in over 4,000 articles and tested in over 200 countries, and it's giving a reading. And that reading picks up everything from understanding how different cohorts connect and disconnect. And as you can imagine, we can pick it up by every part of the ecosystem, which helps people make good decisions. But there's a few things that's quite specific, which challenges the way people understand culture today. And it's about how we pick up key themes like toxicity. We have a cultural health score, which is an algorithm. It's not tell me 1 to 5, do you think the culture is toxic? It's an algorithm that looks at the personal values that people have chosen versus what they see in the organization minus any toxicity. So that would be 100%. And we know toxicity is important because even if you listen to this morning's presentation, we're talking about focus and capability and finding space to do stuff. And actually, sometimes it's about focusing on getting rid of some of these things if you see them in leadership and in the middle layer or anywhere. Because there's a Maslow kind of piece to driving change. And first and foremost, you have to rid these kinds of things. The other thing that our algorithm picks up is this sense of belonging. And again, that is an algorithm that's looking at what gets you out of bed versus what you see, yeah? Which is quite interesting. And I suppose this is the other big one that's interesting. And it's around shared ideas of the future. So what do I mean by that? We have a way through our algorithms to look at what it is that leaders want from their organizations. So if organizations are intent on leaning into AI, we know to lean into AI, we need to see mindsets that are driven by creativity in open mindsets. And we see this because we do loads of work in the legal industry and we know they're on a journey to try and embrace these mindsets. And what we're able to do through our algorithms by asking these questions, we're able to put the organization on a bit of a flight path and we can see actually who's nearest and furthest away. So it's not like digital transformation of old where we paid the consultants huge amounts of money to put in digital transformation and to find that you didn't get the engagement. It's working the other way around and preparing the ground, readiness, so that the organization can be in a good place to be able to embrace the change that's desired. And that's a very key metric for us that brings a lot of, shall we say, direction to boards. And we find that the HR team really gravitate to it because we know in organizations that there is a lot of, how do we put it, anecdotal information around what the culture is. And you need to make smarter decisions to invest all the way along the continuum. right? That continuum being anything from how do we attract, how do we select, how do we set expectation around behaviors, how do we understand the way to communicate, how do we do that meaningfully by understanding different audiences. And you kind of need quality data to be able to do that well. And I think for us, it's very simple, actually, very, very simple. Our tool effectively is about helping leaders make smarter decisions when it comes to measuring and managing culture. Transformative data, I think we're all agreed, is absolutely fundamentally crucial in this day and age. Because again, if you go back to Mr. Timms of earlier, and he was talking about all the stuff that you're involved in, on all the new things from ESG to DEI to sustainability to psychological safety, trying to implement all of those things, I think is very difficult. And I'll also say this, when you think about the way organizations are configured, right? So you've got well, you know this, right? So work with me here. But you've got, leaders who are there to deliver outcomes, yeah, and numbers. You've got the management team who are tasked to deliver it. And then you've got thousands of people beneath them who are charged with doing it. And the middle management crisis is real. And actually, the success in the middle management are the guys who've got suitable feedback loops and enough emotional IQ to interpret the data to make smart decisions. But if you think of the bell curve that exists in organizations, that's not going to be everybody. And I guess HR sits over here trying to empower all those people so that they can do a better job. And I think one of the ways you can empower them is with smarter data on the ecosystems that they're working within. And we know this because this is the world we came from. I ran a lot of marketing teams, and I looked at the effort and the detail and the research that we would think about to involve consumers so that we can deliver better solutions for them. But yet, I worked in organizations where we would just sheep dip people through the different strategies and the different CEOs and the different visions. And we wanted to import that into this world to give people better information around it. And it was fundamentally because we believe, and I believed in all the work that we used to do in doing creative work, if you can't align people in a service-based business, it really doesn't matter. And the point of making all of that, for me, if you can unlock what's in here across all of those groups, my feeling is, in the same way, if you can unlock how many steps you're taking and how much sleep you're getting, I believe if organizations do something similar, that is their pathway to success. And I guess today, we've got a massive head start. Because we've taken our software platform and we've partnered with PwC and we've used this to run the largest study of nearly 7,000 people across the UK, across 30 industries. And we've looked at what gets the UK out of bed in the morning. We've looked at what they see. We've looked at, by comparison, which sectors have greater levels of toxicity. We've looked at the multi-generational piece between millennials, Gen Zers, and working their way up. And the special treat for you today is it doesn't come out till next week. Well, sorry, it comes out in 3 weeks before you start looking for it with PwC. But we're going to show you hot off the press some of the insights that are absolutely driving UK workplace culture at the moment. And it'd be your opportunity to absorb it and to think about how some of these insights can have a positive impact as you begin to prioritize what you need to invest in, how you need to influence upwards, and crucially, how you need to measure success. So with that, I would like to invite you to come and see some of this data, and I would love to have a chat with all of you because I want to hear your feedback around what we've produced. Because we genuinely feel, and I say this, that there is no technology that we have seen that we believe can help you understand your culture and make smarter decisions. So there's a nice challenge to hear otherwise in our conversations around what you're using that we can learn from so that we continue to grow our business. And for that, I thank you.